All right, hey y'all. So in this video, we're going to be going over how to frame the walls for your tiny homes. We already have our foundation and our floor joists in, and so now we're going to go on to the next step, which is the walls, framing the walls. One thing of note is you always want to make sure that you're saving your drawings here as you go along. The first thing that I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select everything that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of it. Couple ways to do it. You can use the move and then hit the control key, or you can control C, control V, just a normal copy paste. And I'm just going to copy that over here. And now I'm going to continue to work on this. So one thing that's nice about this is I'm kind of essentially saving my progress, so that if I see any mistakes that are made or anything, I can always go back and grab my flooring and my foundation there. After that, we're going to go ahead and get in our subfloor, our plywood subfloor. So once again, plywood's coming in 4 feet by 8 feet panels. So I'm going to draw in a 4 foot by 8 foot panel. And for the subfloor, we're going to use 1/2 inch plywood. So I'm going to put in 0.5. And so there's my 1/2 inch sheet of plywood right there. And then I'm going to go ahead, once again, triple click, select the whole thing. Let's make sure the whole thing's selected. Yep. And we're going to make that a component. I'm going to call this 1/2 inch plywood sheet, because that's what it is. And so now I can go ahead and create my subfloor, and I'm going to do that by moving this and covering my flooring, my floor joists. So I'm going to make one there, and then I'm going to copy that. And depending on your design, they're going to fit really nicely, or you may have to shorten some of them. Mine, it turns out, you may have to rotate them as well. Mine, since I kind of did my design in 8 foot cubes, mine should fit pretty darn nicely. But if you wanted to shorten one, let's say this one was too long here, of course I could always click on that, make it unique, right? Enter into it, and I could always make it shorter, and you could do this in either dimension. The hotkey for the push-pull, by the way, is P, so if I just press P, it'll give me that. So I can make it shorter or longer on either end as I need. That would just be like cutting your plywood. Other things that I could do if I had like a weird shape, right, is I could draw a line. Let's say, I needed something like that, at like a 45-degree angle, and then I could just push-pull that down to the bottom, and then I could trim it that way as well. So if you need to do any weird cuts to your plywood, that's how you do it. But I feel good about that one. So then I've just got to do the same business over here. And one more. Voila. So there we have it. So now I have my subfloor in there. And on top of the subfloor is where I'm going to put my walls, right? So I'm going to actually be building my walls on top of that subfloor. This is also a point in time where if you wanted to, and you could do this beforehand as well, if you wanted to fill these in and paint them with a material type, right, we could go in here to the material. I'm going to go ahead and shrink my components, take that out of there. But I could actually fill it with different material types. So, for example, I could search up wood. Let's see. Wood. There it is. Right. And I could find one that I kind of look. So let's say it's just like a plywood, something like that, and I can actually fill in those as plywood flooring. I can do the same with my subjoists. So that's definitely something that can be done. Looks kind of sharp and kind of nice. One nice thing about having all this selected out too is that I could select all of these, right? And then if I needed to remove my floor for any reason, I can just move them out of the way, right? So there's that. We've got our subfloor in. And so the next thing is the walls, right? And when we're framing the walls, the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to show you guys how to frame one wall, and then the other ones you'll kind of follow suit on. The first thing that we need to figure out is how tall our walls need to be. Right, now I know for my building I'm going to make 8 foot tall walls, and that's a pretty standard wall measurement. So let's take a look at creating those. First things first is we're going to need a 2x4. I'm going to frame mine with 2x4s instead of 2x6s. That's kind of a standard, although you're seeing more and more 2x6s because you can fit more insulation in the walls. But I'm going to go ahead and create a 2x4. And I'm going to go ahead and constrain it to that red plane. It's going to be a 2, 4. And then I'm actually going to rotate that. Let's do another one. And I guess I want 4, 2, right? Because I want this in plank orientation in this case. And then I'm going to need that to be the full length of this wall in this case. So that's, I happen to know it's going to be 16 feet. And then I can make this a component. And this is what we'd call a bottom plate. Because it's at the bottom plate of the wall. And I'm going to move that right up onto there. All right. And so that's what I'm going to be constructing my wall on, right? Is that bottom plate is the first thing that you end up doing. And you end up laying that down. Now, typically, you'd actually build your wall on the side, and then you'd put it all together, and then you'd stand it up here. The wonders of SketchUp is that it allows us to actually do everything kind of separately, which is nice. So, next up, we're going to build our main side framing. And so we'll get those in. I'm going to do another 2x4. This time on that blue plane, 2, 4. There we go. And so if I want this to be if I want my wall to be 8 feet tall, right? How tall does this need to be? Well, it's important to keep in mind I'm going to have my bottom plate, and then I'm going to have 2 top plates. I'm going to be doing a double top plate. And so that's 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches. That's 6 inches. This needs to be 8 feet minus 6 inches, so it'll be 7.5 feet. Right there, and then we can measure, double check and make sure that that's right. Yep, 7 feet 6 inches. All right, I'm gonna make this a component, and I'm just gonna call it a stud, right? Because that's what you call these vertical beams. You call a stud. So I'm gonna move that guy to that corner, and I'm also going to move one to the opposite corner as well. Boom, right? So now we've got that framed there as well. All right, so at this point in time, we're going to go ahead and mark out where we want our doors and our windows to be. So I happen to know that I want a door right about here. It's going to be a foot over from here. So this is an 8-foot section here. My door is going to be, let's say, 2 feet over from the edge. Right, so I want this to be 2 feet, right? And then the rough opening from my door, I've got a door that's about 3 feet wide, so my rough opening is going to be 3 feet, right? And so there's my door. And then I know from my door, I've got a window that's over here, and it's a 3-foot wide window, right? Which is 6 feet from my door, and then it's a 3-foot wide window, right? So that tells me where all these things are, and I'm going to go ahead and draw these across as well, these little lines. Okay. Escape. So kind of marking out where everything is. There's my window. And there's my door. All right, so those things are marked. And that's important when it comes to how we actually frame this out and how that ends up looking. So now I'm actually going to select all of those lines that I just drew. I'm going to go ahead and make that a component. And I'm just going to call this my planning, right? So any of this kind of plan drawing that I'm doing in there, I can just draw as a part of this and then reference it as I go along. Okay, so now I know that I want a stud. I want my studs to be 16 inches on center, right? Is going to be my kind of standard where I want these guys. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this guy here and move it over 16 inches, right? So anytime that you're doing these, the first one is going to be from the edge, right? And the next ones are going to kind of follow suit. So then now this one I'll grab from the center point and copy, and it'll go 16 inches. And you'll notice that that's in my door, and that's okay. We'll kind of move that around later and talk about where that's going to go. But right now I'm just going to kind of lay these out to where they would be 16 inches on center. So one at a time, moving them over. See, now it's already figured out that I'm moving things 16 inches. Just so nice. Sometimes SketchUp is just so smart. Didn't do it that time. That's okay though. Can always type it in manually. We are. And that last little bit should be 16 to the edge. So now I've got my studs in there. I've got my vertical studs in where they need to be. They're spaced on 16-inch centers. I'm going to go ahead and copy and do my double top plate. All right, so I'm going to copy this. The hotkey for move is M. So if you ever wanted to know that one. I'm going to do one top plate, and then I'm going to do another top plate right on top of that. Now one thing with this double top plate is that it allows us to overlap, right? Which is nice. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this, or sorry, going to single click, make it unique so I can edit it, and it's not going to affect the other one. I'm going to move this over 4 inches there, and I'm also going to do the same on this side. 4 inches. And what that does is that essentially allows it, so the next wall, these side walls, right, are going to overlap. That top plate's going to be a little bit longer, and it's going to sit on top here. And that allows you to kind of nail the walls together. All right, so this would just be like a standard wall, but I want to add in a door and a window here. Now, one thing of note is that my door placement is not necessarily the most ideal, right, in this case, relative to my studs, because I have to kind of, you know, ideally you want your door to be just off the side of one of these studs. One of these main studs, and same with my window, right? It would be a lot nicer if that was somewhere which was a little bit more convenient. And so that is something to think about as you design, is do you want to move where your door is? So I'm going to go ahead and leave my door where it is, but I am going to go ahead and, let's say, move my window over a little bit. So I want a 3-foot window, but I'm going to have it just kind of off of this stud here. And I'll talk about what that looks like and how we do that when we frame these. So one of the things with the doors that we want to be aware of is that, like I said, the edge of the door needs to be just up against the edge of our rough opening. Needs to be just against a stud, but one of these main studs that goes to the top, but we're also going to need a header for our door, right, as we kind of talked about. And that header needs to be supported by a stud as well. So I'm going to move, so I know that I am going to need, I'm going to go ahead and move this guy out of there. And so I know that I'm going to need a stud on that side of the door, and I know that I'm going to need a stud as well on this side of the door. And these studs here are actually going to be supporting the header of the door. right? So they're going to be supporting the header. So let's say that my rough opening for my door I want to be 3 feet by 7, right? Let's say it's a 7 foot tall door. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and draw a line, a marker line, up 7 feet. So now I know where my 7 foot line is. And then I know that then these guys need to be only 7 feet tall. Oops. See, there it goes, changing all of them. So I gotta make this unique. Same with this one here. I just realized I don't need that marker line because I can go ahead and I already know how tall they are. They're 7 feet 6 inches. So if I just want this to be 7 feet, I'm gonna go ahead and drop this down 6 inches. And they should only be 7 feet tall. I'm gonna do the same for this guy. And there we go. Right. Now our header, I happen to know, is going to be, it needs to be that 4 inches wide. The key with the header is that, right, every single one of these studs is supporting this top plate, which then supports the roof. And you want to support it at certain intervals so that, once again, we keep that length below the point where it'll deflect too much under a certain load. So the same is true up here. So what we end up wanting to do is we end up wanting to have a bigger header that can essentially support this full size. So we make it taller so that we increase the moment of inertia and make it so that it bends less. So in this case, I could make it, probably only need a 4-inch tall header. But because I just have 6 inches, I'm going to go ahead and round it up and make it that full 6. So I'm going to have this on that red plane, and I'm going to make it a 4,6. And with any luck, that should fit in there perfectly. And I know that I need it to be, let's get a measurement there as to the width I need it. Looks like 3 feet 4 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and make that 3 feet 4 inches. And there it goes. I'm going to go ahead and make that a component as always. I'm going to call that door header. And then I'm going to go ahead and move that into place right up on top of there. And that should be nice and flush and even. Right? So there's my door header. And that is all totally good to go. Right? Looking snazzy. Looking super snazzy. All right. So now my door, this is the door frame, right, supported there, but now I need something on the side here. So this is where, like I said, you might want to consider moving things, and I'm actually going to go ahead and consider it because these are 2 small gaps, right? So I could fit in fact, I'm not even sure if I could fit a 2x in there. Yep, I could fit a 2x in there, and I could fit a 2x in there, but then I end up using a lot of wood, so it'll be a lot cheaper and a lot easier for me to just move my door over a little bit. So I'm going to select this guy, and this guy, and I'm just going to move them over just a little bit over to be up against that joist, right? So, or that stud. So now this becomes the king stud, right? This is a trimmer stud, right? And then I'm going to have another king stud over here that'll support the door, and then the door will be fully supported. Right on both sides, it'll have a header. So I'm going to make a copy of this. Control and move to right there. So now my door is totally framed out, right? And that's good to go. Next step will be to frame out my window, right? And so I've got this 3 foot wide window here, and it's going to be kind of the same process, right? So let's say I want this window to be, let me go ahead and use this guy and this guy to set the height for my windows. Right, so let's say I want those windows to be, let's say 3 feet off the ground. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and make this guy so it's only 3 feet off the ground. In order to do that, I know I need to drop it 4.5 feet. That's 4.5 inches. Oopsies. So I'm going to drop it down 4.5 feet. And that should make it, right? So that's only 3 feet off of the ground, right, 3 feet off the bottom. 3 feet, there you go. And that's not necessarily off the ground actually, just realized, because I've still got this bottom plate. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to need to drop that down another 2 inches. So I'm going to drop this down 2 inches. Oops. All right, plus I'll need the sill plate, so I'm actually going to need to drop that down 4 inches. There we go, 4 inches. So now that's at the height where I need it. So now I can move this over to the side of where my window is going to be. Right? Once again, you can kind of see the spacing that leaves, right? That's not necessarily ideal, so I may want to kind of shift where my window is, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. Right, so this is going to support the sill. Did I put that in the right spot? No. So the sill is underneath the window, so those need to actually go there. So I'm going to make another copy of this. And place it right there, right? So those are supporting the bottom of our windows. Go ahead and move this guy just out of the way for now, right? So those are supporting the bottom of our windows, and they should be 3 feet apart. I can always double check and measure. Yep, 3 feet apart. So now I'm going to create that trim plate across the bottom. So I'm going to create a little 2x4, which is the sill. Right, and it's going to be 4, 2. Somehow. Whoa. 4, 2. Oh, that's why it disappeared big. Somehow the point that I selected was way out of scale. See, look at where I am there. Okay, anyways, so I know I need that to be along the bottom here. I need it to be 3 feet. It's the sill size of my window. Go ahead, select it all, make it a component. I'm going to call this windowsill. Right, and so this is for the rough opening for my window. Right, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect to the scale of my window, but my window should be able to fit more or less in there. So there we go. We've got that in. Now, this is kind of where I was mentioning once again, is that you don't necessarily want these kind of gaps like this, right? So I'm actually going to move my whole window over, and you can have them. It's totally fine. You just need to fill that with you need to have a 2x4 running right up against it. But I'm going to go ahead and move it over because it's not necessarily that vital. All right, and so I'm going to move that over there. And so now it's supported on this side, right? It's nailed to this main stud. So that's good. And then I'm going to need another stud on this side, of course. Right. Oops. And so now my window, right, that bottom sill of my window is framed out. Now let's say it's a 3 foot wide window by, let's say it's 2 feet tall, right? Well, that means I need a 2 foot gap here in between my opening, my actual opening. Oh, I'm just realizing my sill needs to be a little bit wider. That's my bad, y'all, my bad. So I'm actually gonna undo all that. It actually does need to be, we need to get this in here too. So I'm gonna go ahead and move. So here's what I need to do. So if I want it to be 3 feet wide, then that means that the gap between the inside of these guys needs to be 3 feet, right? So I need to actually move this guy over here 4 inches. And then I need to go in here and actually pull this out to where it extends and meets up there. There we go. Now we're on the right scale. And I can move these guys right back up against there. And this guy back up against there. All right. So now, right, now I'm ready to kind of set the height of the window itself. Okay, and the way that we do that, and there's a few different ways to trim a window. This is just one way that ends up kind of using the least amount of wood. So I'm going to copy this guy, move it up here. I'm going to make this unique. And let's say that the window that I'm trying to get is, let's say it's, what kind of height would be good for a window here? Let's say 3 feet. So so that's about 3 feet. That's 2'8". But let's say I want it 3 feet. So let's say I want to make it just a little bit taller. Here, a 3 foot tall window. Then I'm going to have to increase this by 4 inches. And that should give us 3 feet. So this is 3 feet tall. This distance between should be 3 feet. So I'm going to copy this guy over to there. So now if we measure and just make sure, right, there's a 3 foot opening, there's a 3 foot opening. So if my window is 3 by 3, and then I put, I need to put my top sill on. And this is just for kind of marking, and there I'm good to go. Now, one thing with this top piece here, right, is that because once again, we've got this gap here. We've got this gap in the support of our roof, so we're actually gonna need a header, right? Now for a 3 foot gap like this, we probably only need a 6-inch header, should be more than enough. We could actually probably get by with a 4-inch header. But I'm just gonna go ahead and make this a 6-inch header, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull this guy up another 4 inches, right? And so there's our header for our window. Forgot to make it unique. So let's go ahead and make unique and then do that same thing. Another 4 inches. All right, and now we're almost done. So now I've got our window kind of framed out, right? You can see where everything's kind of supported. This is all supported and tied to everything below it, right? And these are all attached to these main studs. So everything with this window right now is supported. Now, alternatively, I could have done with this sill, I could have had another one of these guys over here, and there's just another way to do it, just so you guys are aware. I could have had one of these guys right here, right? And then this sill, this could have just gone straight down, and this would be all one piece of wood. These two together would be one piece of wood, and this sill would be a little bit shorter and be resting on top of this, what's called a jack stud, right? So that's one way to do it. This way is another way. Both of them are totally fine. But what you need to do is you just need to make sure, once again, making it structurally sound, we need to make sure that this header here above the window is supported, right, straight down, right, by solid wood going all the way to the bottom. And that needs to be tied on either side to a stud that's going all the way to the top, right, so that this whole thing is kind of tied together and is not going to move or wiggle or fall apart in any way. Now, we still kind of have these gaps here, right, and so to fill those, we have what are called cripple studs. And we still want these to be on 16-inch centers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and measure those 16 inches just for reference from, once again, this was one of our main studs, so it's going to be 16 inches over, so 16. And then I'll tell us where that is, and then we'll do another 16. Right, and so that gives us the point for those. So I can copy this from the center point. That's going to go to that point that we just drew. There we go, that end point. And then the same thing here, going to that end point, right? So now those are still on 16-inch centers. You'll notice that they're closer here to the edge, and that's totally fine. We just keep them on these main 16-inch centers. With the main studs, so that when we're hanging up drywall and things like that, we kind of know we have this regular rhythm that's occurring, and so we can find where things are. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these guys. And I'm just going to move them straight up. So we're going to constrain to the blue axis. Once again, you can always do that using these arrow keys. So I'm going to constrain them straight up. I'm going to make them unique. And then I'm going to shorten them on these points so that they are only going to there, right? All right. And there we go. It looks like we have it. Right, that is a nice looking wall right there. Everything's fully supported and totally good to go, right? So that's how you make your wall. That's the long and short of it. You do the same thing for the other sides with any windows, any doors. If you don't have any windows and doors, it's just the stud straight across. If you have different wall heights, that's something to take into account. And they'll just kind of butt right up against each other. So that's that. Hope that helped. Hope that was useful.